Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Our guest today is Chad. So Chad, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Chad from Integrated Farms, and I'm one half of Chad and Dorothy, and we're located about an hour north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. We sell beef, pork, and chicken direct from our farm right to the consumer. We focus on grass-fed and pasture-raised type meats, and as far as we know, we're the largest pastured chicken producer in Canada.
Awesome. So I'm curious more about your story. Like, have you always been in this industry? Like, how did you get into it in the first place?
Well, it's kind of a weird one, I guess. I grew up farming, and so I enjoyed that. But I was always told as a kid, get out of farming, get out of farming. So I went to school and got my engineering technologist and worked in that industry. And my wife, she did a bachelor in economics, and she kind of worked in the banking and insurance industry. And so we met. We were kind of living in basically the city and, commuting even to Toronto for work and stuff like that. So, but after we had our first kid, we kind of decided that the city life, well, maybe my wife decided more so that she, the city life really wasn't compatible maybe with me. So, and we just wanted to raise our kids out of the city, basically. And so we looked for a piece of property, and we found a real rundown piece of property that I think the last two owners had, it was in the middle of a divorce, and the one before that, they had gone bankrupt here. So, it was a pretty rundown piece of property, but I knew the land was good, and it had a fairly modern house that I knew I could renovate fairly easily. So yeah, off that journey went. And so we didn't really intend on farming initially, but we wanted to have lots of kids, and so we had 4 kids, and my wife wanted to produce food for the kids. And I even told her one time, I think we got in a bit of an argument about chicken, and she's like, well, I said, you can go to the grocery store and buy chicken way cheaper than we can grow it. She says, I don't care. I want to know where it comes from. So, that just really snowballed over the years into, the taste difference was incredibly different. And so we started, just kind of moving along like that, selling to friends and family, and just everybody, loved what we were doing, and our beef was kind of the same story. And then 2011 hit. I got really sick. I started to have a lot of issues, half a dozen different autoimmune issues, and then just my back totally give out too. I was doing a lot of contracting then and just trying to support us in every different way. And I got real sick, basically. And we figured out that if I ate something from home that Dorothy had cooked and it was bought from the grocery store, it was like 50-50. It would make me sick. If I ate from a restaurant, it was like 90%. And if we grew it from our home, it didn't make me sick at all. So we started to really dive into that realm of nutrition and what's different and why what we're eating is just so different than the grocery store. Why does it taste different? Why does it smell different? Why does it cook different? Why does it look different? That just sent us down so many rabbit holes over the years. And, one thing led to another, and we're growing 25,000 chickens outside now in a fairly cold climate too. So it's a bit of a challenge here. And also regulatory wise in Canada, we're just kind of the next level of authoritarianism, I think.
Right.
I mean, we can't really do anything. We're allowed 99 layers. We're allowed 50 turkeys a year. Chickens, you're allowed 300 a year without going through some type of regulatory bodies. We're actually part of the supply management system, but we're in kind of a unique program where we're allowed to, they kind of let us self-market and do all those things, but we do have to follow a lot of the supply management rules. So it is a challenge to do it.
Makes sense. And I guess I'm curious, right? Like, it's one thing, obviously, to raise chickens and to, have chicken for your family and beef for your family, but it's a whole different thing to go and start a business and start selling this product, across the province, even, you could say. So how did you even go from that saying, listen, this can be like an actual business and I can sell this product to anybody who lives in the province?
Well, we started, so in 16, the Chicken Farmers of Ontario opened up chicken farming, and they said, okay, we're going to open up a program that allows you guys to grow 3,000 chickens under a special license. You get audited and you have to do a bunch of little processes. But, the long and short of it is you can take 3,000 chickens to your local farmer's market and sell them, where before that wasn't even an option. And so then we did that. And Dorothy, she called me one day and she says, they're opening up this program. And I said, oh, great. She says, well, we can grow 3,000 chickens. How many should we grow? And at the time, we were at the 300. I said, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. So I think that first year we grew 2,500 just because that's all I could really fit in the barn to brood them and then send them outside. So it worked out to 2,500 that first year. But I was like, we're just going to grow the 3,000. Eventually, we got approached by somebody who wanted to do wholesale for us. So we partnered up with them. And when I started doing the spreadsheets and all the math and trying to figure out how to expand and try to make things work, it didn't make much sense to grow anywhere between 3,000 and 20,000. The math wasn't any better. I had just as much profit in a 3,000 birds as I would in 20,000 birds. So we just started to come up with our own way to do it. And we come up with our own pens that are out on pasture. We come up with our own processes, tried to just look at every part of the, the process of logistically, how would you do it? If you're going to transport chickens, I think it's best to do it in a transport truckload. Well, how many birds fit on a transport truckload? And then, you kind of work from that. And then how many birds do we have to brood at a time? And how many pens do we need? And how big a pens? And what works best for our farm? We come up with kind of a unique, recipe that works for our farm. I think every farm would have to work with a recipe and really drill down in those numbers and try to figure out what works for their farm, because there's lots of guys in the US doing it, and we're very envious of that. So like you got guys like Joel Salatin, and he grows them in like about 100 bird little movable pens that you can move by hand. He calls them chicken tractors, and he moves them along, but he has a lot of like interns and that kind of thing. So labor's not as much of an issue for them, and they want somebody to be able to move those pens where they can do it by hand. They don't need a machine or something like that. Where we were like, well, we have big flat area and we have a big flat farm, so we went to 1,500 birds in a pen, and so a little different square footage than something like that. So it's just, you have to figure out what works for you, and then look at the regulations and just work through the numbers and just really understand your numbers and trust your numbers. I think was one of our biggest things. Was we have so much data now that we took a lot of data points over the years. I have probably millions of data points in a spreadsheet that work, and then all these equations that dump in and move things around. And every year we're tracking it to see if it jives. And Dorothy, actually, she takes care of the numbers on the accounting side. And so she does all of her predictions. And then we come together every few months and we're like, okay, and I do mine totally different. I do mine more from the production side of things, and I do mine in my spreadsheets. And then we compare our numbers and how close are they, and so we're just constantly forecasting and double checking our numbers so that we know where we're at, and then when you talk to the customer, you can justify your prices, because we're not grocery store prices.
Makes sense. So when you are selling your products, do you mostly now do direct to consumer from your website, or do you do wholesales? Like, what does that kind of look like?
So at first, we just started doing like farmers markets and stuff like that, and word of mouth, whatever. And that was great. But we kind of grew that very fast. And we also found that the farmers markets actually up here were kind of dying out, just mostly because of the regulations. Like, we're losing a lot of processing capacity, and just the government's making things difficult to be able to grow food for the public. So, those farmers markets are kind of dying out as a result of that. I mean, we've even lost our biggest chain retailer up here too for supplying small farms. They finally closed up shop this year because there just isn't enough small farms to supply. Anyhow, I forgot where I was going with that, but basically now we just mostly do like Dorothy does a lot of like social media, email blasts. We've really understood early, I think, that you want to own your customer, not rent your customer. So you don't want to you might use Facebook to attract your customer, but then make sure that they're going to your website that you own and then that you are collecting data on your customer. So you want to get their email address, their direct contact information, so that we can send them information directly. So if you get, banned from Facebook for some silly reason, you don't lose your customer base next week, right? So, we had a friend, she runs her farm, and she got banned because somebody asked what breed of chickens she has for her laying chickens, and she said, well, they're red sex-linked chickens. And just using that word sex link got her banned from Facebook for 2 weeks. So, but that was the actual breed of the chicken. So, it's just silly things like that. And then she's like panicking because, she received all her orders through Facebook. So that was a real challenge. So you want to own your customers, and so that you can market to them directly. Dorothy was even just telling me in that we run some errands just a little bit ago, and she's telling me that she hadn't had a chance to do an email blast in about 7 or 8 days, and so she did an email blast last night, and all of a sudden she got a whole bunch of orders this morning. So you kind of got to remind your customer to order too. Like, don't rely on your customer to be like, oh, I'm out of chicken today, or I'm out of beef today. You want to remind them all the time that, hey, I'm still here. Hey, I got your product, and we'd really love you and appreciate your business.
So when it comes to, because you were saying that there are certain regulations about how many chickens you can have, etc., does that make it just kind of difficult to like scale up beyond like a certain amount because you can't have more, chickens and cow? Or are you able to kind of like source like other local farms and partner with them? Like, what does that kind of look like for you?
So I'll answer the last part of the question quickly. We don't partner with other farms. I just simply don't trust them.
Right.
They're going to cut corners.
Right.
The way we grow it is probably the hardest way to do it. So they're going to cut corners, and it doesn't taste the same. We tried it very early on in our business. I just bought some pigs that somebody had raised halfway up, and then we tried finishing them, and the meat was different. And it just tasted different, smelled different, had different fat content, and so it didn't work. So we just like to control every part of our process, and then we can make sure, and then we know that we're giving that to the customer. We're giving them the same product all the time. We harvest all our own crops for the hays, for the beef. We grind and make our own feed for our chickens, and we've come up with all the different unique processes to our chicken. And then on top of that, we've actually taken our meat and we've sent it to a lab in Toronto, and we've had it analyzed nutritionally multiple times, about every other year, and showed that consistency and the nutritional difference between our stuff and what else is out there. So I'm a big advocate of choice. I want free choice. I don't think that I'm better than anyone. I just think that I'm different, and I would like to give the customer the option to, if they choose, they can choose our product. And so we like to show them what the difference is in our product, and if it's important to them, then they choose to purchase from us. But from a regulatory standpoint, in the last 10 years, it has definitely got more difficult. We're losing processors left, right, and center. And just even the existing processors that we do have left, they're struggling, and the inspectors at the plants, they kind of make their life hard, and they make our life hard, and they make our profitability hard, because you never know what you're going to get. You take your birds in, and you don't know how many you're going to get back. You don't know how many they're going to condemn, how many they're going to say that are utilities, and it's kind of on their whim. Like, what is their mood that day? And that's what we get back. So it makes it a real challenge from a profitability standpoint in a business, because there's not a lot of consistency with that, and there's not a lot of ways to predict it. Like, we know that we grow a better bird today than we ever have. We know that, we're doing a better job as far as animal husbandry and all those kind of things. But how do you convince an inspector at a plant that just sees your carcass?
Right.
It's a challenge, and especially when it could be a new inspector just right out of school. They don't know the history of anything, right?
So they have to inspect every single bird.
So yeah, that's kind of frustrating. Like, we use a smaller scaled plant with kind of a Mennonite that are Mennonites, and so they're really good. But yes, basically they just have to leave the guts on the bird, and they pull them out, and then every bird has to be inspected for the guts. And if they think, something just is a little off on the guts, then that bird isn't fit for human consumption. But it kind of burns me a little bit, because like, they're working at, a really relatively slow pace compared to what, say a Costco bird would be doing. They're doing 240 birds a minute. I think I've heard the numbers. So I just can't see how an inspector is being quite as diligent on something at that scale than it is at our scale. So it presents challenges. Yeah.
So I guess, like, I mean, on average, obviously, you said that it varies depending on the inspector, but what percentage of your birds typically get rejected?
So it used to be about 1/10%.
Okay.
Once we got our process down pat and we were happy with how things were going, especially switching to making our own feed, that made a really big difference on our comorbidities. We reduced our comorbidities by about 90% when we switched to making our own feed. That was a real game changer for us. Once we've the feed mills around here, they're used to the commercial system. They aren't used to a pastured chicken. And they simply said to me one day, they said, we don't really know what your birds need nutritionally because they're so different than what we're used to. And they had tried 4 or 5 different rations with us, and we didn't see any real differences. So we joined the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, and we started going to their conferences and their meetings and stuff like that. And through that association, we met quite a few people that really helped us, and we basically convinced us to grow our own feed. And so, or at least make our own feed. I get some of the ingredients from neighbors, but that made just a massive difference, because what we found was the commercial system works on this lowest cost feed formula. So whatever the cheapest ingredient possible to put into that feed to feed that animal, that's what they do. And so there's a lot of basically industry waste that's put through our animal feed system. And so we don't believe in that. So we use all virgin whole grains, and the difference in our birds was remarkable. That being said, I think our latest batch, we had almost 1% condemned for comorbidities. So, and just randomly, there's no, our processor was congratulating us and telling us, how consistent and beautiful our carcasses are. They always, you can see our birds physically coming down the line, like when it's in there with other chickens. So there's other farms, process on the same day. You can physically see the difference in our birds in their carcass. They have a different color to them, a different shape. Like they're just a different looking bird. And so they're telling us how beautiful our carcasses are, and then we get this 0.9% comorbidity.
What do you do with the ones that get rejected?
They get composted. We don't get them back with nothing.
Okay.
It's just a total waste. And then the other half of it is the inspector's allowed to do what we call utilities. So if they deem a part of the bird isn't fit for human consumption, so like a wingtip or, might be damaged or something like that. So they'll cut that off the bird, or there's a lesion on the skin. They'll cut that off the bird. Well, they seem to be really aggressive about that now too. So, we can lose over 10% of our birds to that as well.
So then you sell them by the pound. So they'll just sell just going to be a cheaper bird, I guess.
So we sell all the birds that are basically perfect. We typically will sell those in wholes.
Okay.
And Dorothy, actually, we opened up our own commercial kitchen. And so she has a licensed commercial kitchen that she can cut any of those birds that weren't perfect birds. She'll cut them up and put them in pieces, and then we sell them as parts and pieces.
Oh, nice. Okay. That's good. Well, at least from those, you can make some money off of it as opposed to full.
Yeah, it was a cost to us to put up that commercial kitchen and to, because our processor isn't interested in doing any extra processing. So they just want to kill a bird and get it out of there. So
yeah, makes sense. So essentially, just to add, just to go back to my earlier question, so you guys are essentially allowed to sell more. There's no limit on how many you can sell at this point.
We have to buy quota for everything we've done. So right now, to do our 25,000 birds is roughly $1 million license.
Right. Got it. Okay.
We got to keep buying more if we want to grow more.
Oh, God. So then you are allowed to, so if you, let's just say, had demand for people that wanted to buy 25,000 more birds than what you're doing now, then you would just have to buy an extra license. But that is allowed just based on the regular.
It's challenging. So in Canada, your minimum farm size, once you buy quota, is supposed to be 14,000 units of quota, which allows you 13 kilograms of live weight bird per annual year. But they opened up a new program called the local niche markets, which is what we entered into. And it allows us between 1 and 1,000 units of quota. So we can never go over the 10,000 units. So we can never produce more than 130,000 kilograms if we bought enough quota to go to the 10,000 units. We're not allowed to go over that in self-market. If you go over that, then you got to go to the 14,000 units, and you're really only allowed to sell to a processor. You're not allowed to self-market or do anything direct to the consumer. So we're kind of in this no man's weird land where we're bigger than the little guys guys that are just going to the farmers markets and selling to friends and family, but we're not into the core market system where we're supplying, some of the restaurants and grocery stores. So we're kind of
Makes
in this
sense.
middle ground where we're allowed to be, but the economics now have kind of changed since we started, and the quota is so valuable now that I think we would find it very difficult to expand. So we've been kind of sitting stagnant right now. We've been trying to figure out ways. We definitely have demand. We could probably sell 3 times as much chicken tomorrow. It's
Right.
more making the economics work, and trying to work with the existing system is a challenge.
Makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I guess as part of the system, from my understanding, is you can only sell direct to consumer within your province, right?
Yes, yeah, you can't sell interprovincially unless you get it processed at a federal plant, and there really isn't any available to us. When we actually first started, our first batch of chickens were processed at a federal plant, so we technically would be allowed to move them around the country, but we've since moved to a provincial plant. That plant didn't work out very well for us, so
That's awesome. Nice. Yeah, awesome. So, well, Chad, thanks so much for your time today.